Welcome, and thank you for joining the Improving Foster Care Town Hall, co-hosted by myself, Assemblymember Dr. Joaquin Arambula, and Senator Ana Caballero. We are lucky to have a wonderful group of panelists who I'd like to introduce now, from Chris Stoner Mertz with the California Alliance for Child and Family Services. We also have Kathy Sanderling Mcdonald with the California Welfare Directors Association, as well as Lorraine Ramirez and Hector Serta, both social workers from SEIU 521 in Fresno County, and Angie Schwartz, the Deputy Director of the California Department of Social Services. I look forward to a productive conversation in which we are able to find productive solutions and identify some best practices for all of our counties to improve upon foster care. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce and have Jeffrey Roth with Senator Caballero's office say a quick hello.
Thank you, Dr. Arambula. I appreciate that introduction. Hello, everyone. My name is Jeffrey Roth. I am Legislative Director for Senator Caballero. First, I would like to thank Dr. Arambula for his attention and leadership on this issue. And second, would like to extend the sincerest apologies from Senator Caballero. She had to attend to a personal matter and could not make it here today, but because it is such a critical issue that we're all here to discuss, I'm here to listen, to report back, and to extend our office's partnership with everyone here today so that we can find some really great solutions to make sure that our county and state's children that are in foster care are treated with the dignity and respect that they deserve. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we will hear from our first panelist, Chris Stoner Mertz with the California Alliance for Child and Family Services. Please begin.
Thank you so much, Dr. Arambula, and to Senator Caballero for pulling together this panel. I think it is so critical that we're talking about this as often as we can, because we need to make sure that all foster youth are getting their needs addressed. I'm the CEO of the California Alliance of Child and Family Services. We have 157 nonprofit agencies serving across the state in all 58 counties on behalf of foster youth and other children, youth, and families, providing services in foster care, education, behavioral health, juvenile justice, and prevention. First off, I think it's important to say that Fresno is not alone in this challenge that they are facing. We're aware that many counties are struggling to meet the needs of foster youth with significant and complex needs. We're seeing really the effects of building a system without having the adequate resources and coordinated efforts that I think we need. In spite of the best intentions, I think, of everyone, we continue to struggle to support some of our existing programs, like our short-term residential therapeutic programs and our foster family agencies, at the kind of level we need, given some of the complexities that we're seeing in foster youth's needs. We also know there are gaps in our system of care. We need more family finding and engagement for youth who have been in care for longer periods of time. We need a full crisis continuum of services that can really address regionally the needs of children and youth who may be ending up in offices or getting bounced around from either family to family and or placement to placement. We put together a publication, and I'm happy to share the link in the chat, that really addresses those regulatory challenges I think we're facing and that we need to address. We also know that with FFPSA, Family First Prevention Services Act, we now have new challenges in implementing that act in California. We have issues related to how STRTPs may, in fact, if they are large campus-based facilities, be considered institutions of mental disease, complicating even more our efforts to transition children into families. And so one of the things I want to make sure I address, before CCR was implemented, we had a pilot program across several counties called the Residentially Based Services Pilot. It was a highly successful pilot and had some elements in it that, unfortunately, when we implemented legislatively CCR, we did not include. Some of those elements included more intensive wraparound services and supports to families when children left residential care, as well as the ability for children to return for short periods of time and get that crisis intervention they needed. So I think we need to look at where have we had success and how do we build the types of programs that we know are best practice models across the state. And finally, we really need a statewide approach, particularly for those youth with the complex care needs. We've got to sit down with the state, the counties, the providers, and identify how is it together we are going to both develop very individualized programs, which there is some funding in the budget for this, but we need to work together on it. And we want to also look at ways to integrate a database system that ensures we're aware of youth that need placement. How do we really, on a very individualized basis, identify when a youth is in need of a service and then bring all of our resources at a statewide level? Having us look forward to the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Chris, for those wonderful words. We will now go to Lorraine Ramirez, social worker from SEIU 521. And I will start before she begins with a moment of gratitude for those on the front lines who were able to bring this issue to our attention. Lorraine?
Thank you. My name is Lorraine Ramirez. I'm a social worker and have been working for the county for about 20 years now. The reason I'm on the panel today is to encourage other Fresno County workers to join this movement of change. Changing our collective mindset that has been instilled by the current administration and leadership to keep the status quo, and it can't get any better. Social workers pursue this career not for any recognition and or any great financial compensation. They do the work to make a difference in a child's life. It's time that DSS staff know that they have the support in our colleagues at all of our work sites and in our union staff. I've been in labor management meetings talking about our crises and our children in not the most appropriate places. And, time and time again, the department has just failed to really address those issues until, the media. But one of the concerns that I find is, or one of the things that we find is that social workers are just frustrated. We're frustrated that there are so many investigations that we cannot get completed in a timely manner and or documented into the system. It becomes so overwhelming that it takes a toll on us as social workers because we feel we're failing to meet the needs of the children and the families. But I know other departments share this reality also. So in order for the children of Fresno County to be a priority, DSS leadership needs to stop underfunding social services, recognize that this is a crisis, and stop looking at children of this county as a number, but more of our vulnerable population. A new building is not going to address the larger issue at hand. Over the last 4 years, 146 workers in social services series have left county employment when there were 136 positions budgeted in the social work series. Over 4 years, the turnover rate for social workers is at 107%. And an overwhelmingly a majority of those terminations were voluntary. We need to start respecting workers' voices and respect our expertise in this field. Together, I know my union, and I know that my union and I look forward to working with the local, state, and community partners because our children deserve so much better. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorraine. Next, we will hear from Hector Serta, also with SEIU 521. Hector. think you might be on mute, Hector.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me? Good. Thank you there, Assemblymember Arambula, Dr. Arambula. My name is Hector Serta. I am a social worker here in Fresno County. I'm a proud member of SEIU Local 521. And I'm here on this panel because as a social worker, as a local community member and resident, I believe I have a bit of a unique edge. My professional experience, my life experience has allowed me to meet with many foster parents, many agencies, many other social workers, even child welfare directors and leaders of a lot of child welfare agencies across the state. That is a unique experience I've been able to have that I feel a lot of my coworkers do not. And that's kind of a mandate. I'm mandated to have to speak on a lot of the issues I know make a child welfare system work efficiently. I have worked as a part-time lecturer in child welfare, so I believe I know a little bit of what I'm talking about, and I'm here to encourage all of my colleagues across the entire county who work for child welfare that it's time to really let people know the type of work we do, because we don't feel that we're being respected and honored. And the other part of that is we are not given the resources that is research-based that works. We're not given the resources we know works for good outcomes for children and families. One of the things that I would like to share and speak on is for over 10 years, there's been numerous research articles, particularly with the National Association of Social Workers and the Social Work Policy Institute, that have found that a high caseload leads to high turnovers and burnout and stress for social workers. A lot of that research included some counties here in California. And what they also found is that when you had better paid staff and staff who were treated better, you had a safer system. So that's a problem here in Fresno County, because we have, as Lorraine mentioned, we have a high rate of turnover. And 80% of people who are leaving intendedly. They're not being told to leave. They're not being fired for doing a bad job. They're leaving because they don't have the capacity and the ability to do the job. The work I do right now as a case manager, the public needs to know how we do this. And I created somewhat of a little picture to make it very easy. And if you look at this picture here, this dot right here, that represents me, the social worker. And this dot up here with two dots, that's the child and their parents. And all these lines and dots connected to them is all the people of services and mental health, schools and therapy that are connected to them, that are then connected to me, this dot. And I am the central focus of managing all that work. And I have to be in meetings, I have to be in debriefings, I have to meet with my supervisor, with other colleagues, and all these dots to ensure that this dot here is well cared for in a safe manner. However, this dot here, which represents me as the worker, I can't manage all these dots if I'm overworked and I have 30 of these scenarios going on in my caseload. Now, to add more to that, there's one more dot I didn't mention. This dot right here, that represents the court case, the judge, the public. We are publicly, legally mandated to ensure that children get the services they need because we're responsible. And it becomes very complicated. And when I'm not able to manage all this, my public accountability to the courts and to all of you as the public, it's very weary. It becomes, it can become unsafe and unmanageable and unstable. And that's why I'm here to talk about that. We, as the workers, we don't have the resources. There are just too many people who are quitting, too many people who are leaving. And as people leave, all those cases get reshuffled around to the workers that remain behind, and that's unmanageable. And I'm here to tell you We have to do something about it. It's not okay for us to function in this manner. So with that, I'd like to close my remarks and say thank you for hearing me out.
Thank you, Hector, for speaking your truth and sharing it with us. Next, we will hear from Kathy Sanderling Mcdonald with the County Welfare Directors Association.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Arambula. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today. Kathy Sanderling McDonald, I'm the Executive Director of CWDA. We're a nonprofit that represents all 58 county human services agencies. So that includes the child welfare agencies that administer the program on behalf of the state and the federal government. We're one of about 10 county-run child welfare states where the state has oversight, but the front line is counties and our staff, as you've heard from the last two speakers, who are the ones really out there on the front lines administering this on behalf of the state. Our members take this job and this role extremely seriously and appreciate the attention that you're paying here, not just in this hearing, but in other hearings as well, and your role in the legislature, and appreciate it. So I want to talk a little bit about why we're in the situation and whether California and Fresno County are alone, and a few ideas that will, I think, get into more depth in the Q&A period about what might be done to help address the situation that we're in. First of all, why we're in the situation that we're in is a combination of a number of factors. And Ms. Mertz, I think, really did a great job of talking about the lost placements and the lost services that would go along with those placements that have come as a result of implementing the Continuum of Care Reform, the Family First Prevention Services Act, the federal law, as well as this new looming issue related to the definition of institutions of mental disease and how that will result in lost federal funding and or the need to make significant changes in how we serve our highest needs youth in congregate facilities. I want to say that it's not our goal in any way, shape, or form to have children live in a residential facility and stay there. The idea is not to find a service and a placement and say, we're good, we're going to walk away from that youth. We want them to be able to get the services they need to stabilize, begin that treatment, and then begin to step down, ideally, ultimately, with a family, with their own relatives if possible. And our goal is always first to try to reunify with the parents and get them back home. And so this is a conversation that we're having about a relatively small number of youth who are among those with the most complex care needs, and not really the entire group of 60,000 foster youth that we have, but they're the youth for whom we are, I think, struggling the most at this point. We've lost hundreds of placements since the implementation of the Continuum of Care Reform over the past 6 years. Overall, CCR is an amazing set of changes. It's extremely important. There are so many improvements that the law makes. However, it has resulted in a loss of placements, coupled with the other factors. Just this year alone, we've lost an estimated 300 placements and the services that go with those placements across about 30 providers. In some cases, those providers have folded altogether. In some cases, they've said to our members, we will not take your children anymore for various reasons. I think the other thing that's going on is that we just have such a greater need greater understanding of the needs of children and youth who face significant trauma. And this is not just youth in foster care, but across the spectrum of child development. And that growing need, growing focus on the need for increased attention and services really has brought into stark focus the fact that for many years, not enough services were provided. And as a result, we've got this small group that are not a large percentage of those in care, but they're greatly in need. And they didn't receive the types of services that we really would have wanted them to receive early on. So they're now really, due to no fault of their own, in a situation where they don't have the ability to cope. They have difficulty connecting with other youth, with those who are trying to provide services to them or caring for them in a home. And as a result, they do end up going through multiple placements and have a difficult time finding a placement and a provider that will say yes when our county makes that call. This is not something new. We've been raising the issue for a number of years. I think we've been referring to it for a number of years as part of the unfinished business of the Continuum of Care Reform legislation. And in 2018, we worked with Assemblymember Cooley to sponsor AB 2083, which was signed into law that directed the state to do a number of things, including a gaps analysis and recommendations to fill those gaps, specifically in placements and services. We knew that these gaps existed even before that, but the legislature agreed, and we were able to get that bill signed back in 2018. And that report was due in 2019. And unfortunately, the gaps analysis was completed last year, but the recommendations report has not been completed. And additionally, this past year, as you know, we had a number of youth who'd been placed out of state, about 130 youth, and they were returned over a period of about a month and a half from those placements in other states into California. And many of them were not in good places. And it is absolutely not the case that we would ever want a child or youth to be placed in harm's way. About half of the counties had one or more of these children or youth placed in those particular homes. All of them came back at once. And as you heard, we already were in a situation where we were losing placements. And so we do have data that indicate kind of where did they end up when they came back to California. And we've been saying now for months, publicly in hearings that you've held, as well as in policy hearings on legislation that's been moving through the process, that a number of them are not in good places, or run the risk of being in county offices, or even on the street where they can be injured or even killed. And we have examples of that. This is not a good situation, and we appreciate the light that you're shedding on it now. It's also just not something that's happening in one county or even just in California. We are engaged with those other states that I mentioned that are county run, as well as a number of state run states that are facing very similar crises. So it's really not overstating it to call it a crisis. The county that you represent is absolutely not the only affected community in our state. There are, and at any given moment, a county could end up with a youth identified in their care who has a complex need, who is in crisis, who needs this level of service, and a struggle to be able to find it. So quickly, I'll just say three things that I think could be helpful here, and look forward to getting into this in more detail in the Q&A. Certainly, quality facilities and quality services for children who are in crisis, ideally that could be secured temporarily to stabilize and ensure they receive the needed services and treatment. These are things that can be created that other states have created. Psychiatric residential treatment facilities, or PRTFs, is one option. And additionally, we need to ensure that there's a variety of step-down options with well-trained staff, and ultimately foster parents, including relatives, where services follow that child, and ideally treatment team members follow along as well to have that continuity. These programs will often need to be tailored to individual children with a higher staff to youth ratio than is typically paid for by the regular rate setting system. And finally, a well-trained and well-staffed system of child welfare workers. I really appreciate Mr. Serta's comments, and just want to note that there really are significant workforce issues across the child welfare system. Again, not just in Fresno County. For example, we know that our schools of social work have lost funding and therefore have reduced the number of slots to develop degreed social work professionals. And I think he listed a number of other types of providers that would serve our youth or potentially work in a county that we've also, we're struggling to hire, we're struggling to recruit for a number of reasons. So we welcome accountability. We also need state leadership and partnership with our other service providers and everyone at the table, like Ms. Stoner Mertz mentioned, to give our child welfare agencies, and though I do not represent them, I want to make sure to mention that the probation agencies also serve youth who are considered foster youth and are also in a similar situation. And we want to be able to safely and appropriately serve all of the children and youth that we care for. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Kathy. Next, we will hear from Angie Schwartz. She is the Deputy Director for Child and Family Services with the California Department of Social Services. Angie?
Great, good afternoon. I want to start by thanking Dr. Arambula and Senator Caballero for putting this town hall together and for the opportunity to be part of this panel. And I greatly appreciate hearing from the other panelists, and just want to start by acknowledging at the outset that we recognize that there are children and youth within our system that have experienced such significant trauma and separation and loss that they can be incredibly difficult to serve. And I also want to acknowledge the incredibly hard work within our counties and by our providers and our social workers to create pathways to serve those youth. I know we all share the ultimate goal and vision of making sure that every child is raised in a loving and stable home. That has to be our North Star as we engage in and address this issue. Every single child deserves to grow up with a family, and we cannot lose sight of that goal or how critically important that objective is as we're having this conversation. And to get there, to achieve that vision, there's not a one-size-fits-all solution, as I think you've heard from the other panelists. There are real capacity gaps within our system, and those capacity gaps need to be addressed. And we're working in close collaboration with our county partners and our providers in order to develop and implement both short-term and long-term solutions to address those capacity gaps. The work's enormously challenging, but I actually believe we're in a moment where we have a lot going for us. We have engagement at all levels of government. We have laws in place that allow us to have the flexibility to actually be innovative, to think outside the box, to develop innovative rate systems, innovative service approaches, innovative pathways to serve children that is not sort of a one-size-fits-all approach, that truly is that child-centered, child-specific approach to their care and needs. And maybe most critically, we have resources, new resources that are available to help address those challenges. There was significant funding made available during this year's budget to allow us to work with counties in order to address and develop those child-specific solutions, as well as to address some of the gaps within each of the counties that all the other panelists were mentioning just a moment ago. I'm sure we're going to be getting into the details of those new funds during the Q&A, so I won't spend my time here detailing what those investments include. I'll just keep it short by saying that this conversation is incredibly important, not only to lift up the challenges that we're facing, but really to focus on those opportunities that are before us and how we can come together as partners in order to address those challenges. I'm very much looking forward to continuing the conversation through this town hall, but even more to deeply engaging on these issues with all of you after this town hall so that we can actually bring these ideas to fruition. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Director. And we will now transition on to the Q&A section. Before I begin, I will just state that an invite was sent to every member of the Fresno County Board of Supervisors. And while two of them, including Chairman Brandow and Supervisor Pacheco, had signaled their participation, they have not made it onto the panel yet, and hope that many of these questions and answers, as well as this town hall, is information that they will find useful. Ultimately, many of us are trying to figure out how to identify what are those best practices. And I want us to focus on certain areas first. This first question will be for both the Department of Social Services, for the California Alliance, as well as for Kathy with the Welfare Directors Association, as I want us to focus on what kinds of services and programs and support can be offered specifically to our foster parents or those who would like to become foster parents as California continues our transition out of groups homes and out of state placements.
Do you want me to start, Dr. Arambula? All right. I think it's critically important to have child-specific recruitment strategies so that when we're looking at our foster homes, we're looking at them through the lens of that specific child and that specific child's needs. And then to do what Ms. Sanderling was also talking about, we need to make sure we have in place real supports for those resource families, including wraparound, intensive treatment, foster care, that they have appropriate training and just-in-time training so that it's available as they're encountering specific scenarios and they need that information in real time in that moment. We need respite, we need on-site supports and services. And we have contracts and supports available, through the department that the counties can tap into in order to address some of the really specific needs that come up for our hardest to serve young people. For example, a contract with UC Davis for neuropsychiatric assessments for children who have co-occurring developmental disabilities or medical and mental health needs. We've got child-specific technical assistance to provide specialized permanency services, and can offer contracts that counties can tap into to be able to engage with experts in family finding and in how to best engage and support and provide supports to our families. We are engaging in very intensive technical assistance and supports with our counties in order to try to enhance wraparound models and grow and expand those models. And then we also have technical assistance to make sure that we have that rate flexibility that I was mentioning before, so that we can have sort of innovative approaches and we can do things that are kind of outside the box in terms of what is the thing that this particular child needs and how can we bring those investments to bear in order to make sure that that child has that support within the home. So I think we can leverage all of those things in supporting our resource families.
Next, if we can hear from Chris, followed by Kathy.
I think that Ms. Schwartz comments certainly agree with those. I would emphasize the need for respite care for foster parents. They need to have the support of just having a break. All parents do. Foster parents need it even more. I want to emphasize the supports, not just the services in home, but the stability of social workers. And to Ms. Ramirez and Mr. Serta's points, as well as foster family agency social workers, research has demonstrated that children who have the same social worker are about 75% of those children are able to get to what we call permanency, right, and stability. That drops to 17% when you have two social workers. It drops even further to about 2% when you have three. So whether it's a county caseworker that's supporting the family or a foster family agency social worker providing those services, it's critical that the workforce is supported to support those families. And of course, I think we have to listen to what foster parents tell us, right? It's the resource families that, and I noticed that someone in the chat said, we need resource families members to be part of this conversation, and I couldn't agree more, as well as you.
Kathy?
Great, thank you, Dr. Arambula. It's an excellent question. I'll try to build on the prior speakers' comments. One of the things that we had in place when the continuum of care reform first started was funding that was specifically directed toward recruiting, retaining, and supporting foster parents. We call our foster parents resource families now. We don't want to be limiting to just foster parents who you might typically consider a foster parent not related to a particular child, have already been pre-approved, are in the system and awaiting a placement, but to also consider relatives who typically are approved more at the time that one of their relative children comes into our care, but need just the same services and supports as well as training that a non-related foster parent would. That funding was, the acronym was FIPPERS, as we pronounce it. You may recall the FIPPERS funding. And unfortunately, that did expire last year and was not renewed. One of the reasons that it's really important that we have that funding and the services that it provides is that as we are doing family finding efforts, which counties have significantly increased and stepped up over the course of the CCR implementation, we need to be able to tell these relatives and non-related foster parents, we will be there to support them when they need a break, when they need services, that those services are going to be available for them to take the pressure off of them. It's stressful. And especially if you're talking about children and youth, all of whom have experienced trauma and may not have gotten earlier treatment and may then have behaviors, may be aggressive through, again, this is not their fault, but that is how it manifests when you don't have that treatment to help address and overcome that trauma. Then you may have to talk with a relative to sort of say, we can support you in providing services to this child or youth. If that's not there and we're not able to back that up, they're going to say no, or they're going to say, come get this child. I can't care for them anymore. And that is when they end up in these higher level placements. So ideally, as we're working together to get those higher level and really crisis focused placements to stabilize youth and get them that treatment, then we need a place to step them down to. And that's why being there to support those families is so critical through something like the types of services that we provided through FitFirst.
Thank you for that. And I'd like to build off of what Chris had just said there. And so the next question will be addressed to both Lorraine and Hector, as well as CWDA and Department of Social Services. But I'd like to similarly understand what kinds of supports can be provided for our social workers who are on the front lines of this situation. For example, what can be done to ensure that there is sufficient training as well as concerted efforts, not only at recruitment and staffing, but also with retention? Lorraine or Hector, either of you can begin.
I can kind of speak to that. I work on the front lines here, emergency response. So these are when the first people that actually go out and make the contacts with families. I also do what we categorize here is called standby, which is after hours. So we have social workers that have been trained to address abuse or neglect after hours. So after 5 p.m., well, we start at 7:30, from 7:30 p.m. until 8 a.m. and on the weekends, holidays. So this facility is running 24 hours. And so you talked about training. That has been something we've continued to bring up to our program managers, our directors. I've been here 20 years, like I said, and we used to have training units in each area. And training units consisted of a veteran worker or workers that have been here long enough, that have those relationships with the community, that have relationships, that know the services that are out there. And what they would do is when the new workers came in, they would be trained by the veteran worker. And not for a long period of time, but enough so that the new worker got familiar with the case. So that's what we used to have. And it worked. It worked very well because the workers weren't coming in here learning from another new worker. They were learning what needed to be done and how it should be done correctly so that we didn't have these children falling through the cracks. In family reunification services, which I also worked in, we had a training unit there. So when we went there, you're like Hector said, you have a judge, you have all these service providers, you have the parents. So as a new worker, when you're walking into an area that is in such high demand with so many people needing your attention, these veteran workers were able to say, okay, this is how you manage this. This is kind of a way you could do it. So they kind of let you develop your own style. And then, of course, when you go into permanency planning, where our children are not reunifying with their families and they're in a more permanent plan, that's where it's a little bit of a slower pace, not as high demand as the other two areas, but they're able to spend a little bit more time with their kids, very little bit more time, but their caseloads are high. In family reunification and in permanency planning, they have very high caseloads, and the demand is way too much for any one social worker to handle. So we really need to look at those veteran workers that we have. We need to I don't want to say take advantage, but we need to use the knowledge that they have so that would happen with retention. That's one area. There's just a lot of different ways that the veteran workers that are here can support the department and can support our community and keep our kids from falling through those cracks, but they have to be used. We have to reach out to them and we have to make sure that they're part of what goes on because they're the ones doing the work every day.
Thank you. Would like to bring in Hector and see if you have some comments you'd like to add. Hector?
Yeah, I'd like to add, so one of the things that I've experienced as a worker, new worker, this was 4 years ago. I've been with the department 4 years. When I started, it was an emergency response where Lorraine is currently at. Now that area is very specific in the work that we do with children and families. We are the emergency responders. We're out talking with families and children. We're determining if we need to be involved. And one of the challenges that I saw was I was new to the department as a social worker by education and profession. Social work is not new. Being a people person and being of service is not new to me. However, I'm confronted with learning new vernacular, new forms and things that I have to understand how it works. And it takes about 6 months for me to be trained effectively to work on my own. And I would not have been able to do that without other seasoned, experienced workers. And when we are losing a lot of our seasoned, experienced workers who've been here for a few years, such as myself, we're not maintaining that. So it's hard for the new workers to learn. But we do need time. We do need some grace period to learn and grasp that before a case can and should even be assigned to us. In some cases, that's not what's happening. Some of my colleagues are being assigned based on their title and their professional experience, but they've never worked in a social services setting regarding court. They're frustrated because there's so much demand right away that they'd rather go somewhere else and work. They're like, I would rather be respected and go work somewhere else. This is too much for me to grasp all in one. It's like chugging down a gallon of water in 10 seconds when you're supposed to be sipping it little by little. The other issue that I'm personally experiencing, and I know a lot of my colleagues have been in this situation, when you're in an area, for example, emergency response, if you're moved to another task area, I'm now in permanency planning, working with our long-term cases. I'm new to a lot of things and I'm expected to have known or know things, and I don't. And that's unfair to the worker, that's unfair to the client and the child, because I should know. And that's not a healthy way to treat us as workers. I am just 7 months into the new area and I'm getting a feel for it, but it is also very, very stressful and difficult to manage. And I'm expected as a professional to have the skill set to know right away, and that's not possible. And we don't have that support. One of the other things I want to mention, I know Angie was talking about this, when it comes to our care providers, our foster homes, we do have a very innovative way to support foster families, to support group, what we call STRTPs, this child-specific recruitment strategies for finding foster homes. We also have very specific funding streams and funding amounts that go to these homes to support the child. The problem I see also is, why don't we have caseload specific compensation packages for those workers that we know are being given high caseloads, are being given some of the cases that require a lot of people and a lot of management? Counties can and should encourage some type of bargaining where workers are compensated also, because yes, we're increasing pay and support for homes and foster homes, but we're not changing what I mentioned earlier in my graph. The focal person is the social worker. We have to manage all that. So we need to think outside of that box on how we compensate workers.
Thank you very much for that. We will go next to Kathy Sanderling Mcdonald, followed by Angie Schwartz. I do want to recognize we have had the supervisors join us, and we'll give them an opportunity to comment after this. And I'm glad that you are able to take part in this discussion. Next, we will hear from Kathy, and if I can, would like to ask if you have any information as well about the data point we heard regarding 107% turnover in the last 4 years. Is that normal for counties to have that much turnover? And just hoping you can provide a little bit of insights on that.
Sure. Thanks, Dr. Arambula. I will likely have to follow up with you on that. I cannot, I mean, I have no reason to second guess the data. I'm not familiar with that number. I will say anecdotally that we do hear about turnover among many of our workers, certainly in child welfare, are even down to our eligibility worker staff in the anti-poverty programs that we operate. And it's a similar issue there, I know, as we were talking about just a moment ago about how long it may take to get a worker or a staff person, or in this case, a child welfare worker, up to speed to feel like they're able to take on that caseload on their own. It's something that we see across most of the programs, if not all of the programs that we operate on the state's behalf. And I would just say, and I'm happy to follow up with additional information for you and the senator after I have a chance to dig into that. Couple thoughts I have is that I would agree that more training is needed in a variety of topics. Remember that child welfare social worker training was not something that was realigned to counties in 2011. It remained at the state level. The idea being a statewide sort of standardized set of training through our training academies would be the best way in which to ensure that solid base of knowledge across all of our child welfare staff. Unfortunately, the funding had not been increased in a number of years. Just this year, you may recall, we were able to secure $7 million in the current year to help increase and update and really revamp the training. There were a number of things that had just simply not been incorporated. A number of the practices that we've implemented through CCR, for example, as you know, we're having significant and in-depth conversations about reducing inequities and disparities in our system. And we need training tools and helping our workers engage families differently and earlier in order to address those issues as well. So really enabling through that funding to work with the state and make sure that the training is up to date and as relevant as possible will, I think, at least partly help those issues that Mr. Serta was talking about, though his point about losing seasoned staff who can mentor and really take under their wing the new staff is something I think to really think about. Two other quick things. One is just to say that the discussion of emergency response, we know that our emergency response caseloads have been very high in recent years. And anecdotally, we hear that the investigations are becoming more and more complex over time. The workers need to get in there, really be trained and have a low enough caseload that they're able to figure out what is going on with the family and whether there does appear to be substantiated abuse or neglect to the degree that we would want to remove the child, or if not, what would we do? We were thankful to receive $50 million in the current year, along with strong efforts by SEIU to be able to get that funding, and look forward to that being made available shortly to counties to begin spending. I think we're right on the verge of that going out. And then finally, I want to remember too that we're not the only program that's really competing for what is, as I mentioned earlier, a small already and shrinking pool of degreed social work professionals. I know that our foster family agency homes also utilize social workers, and you don't necessarily have to have a degree to be able to do this job, but really the degreed social work professionals who come out of those social work schools are very much in demand. And I know, Chris may have something to add here, but I know we, as well as the FFAs, do struggle at times to be able to attract, recruit, and then retain those important staff.
Thank you for that. Next, we will hear from Deputy Director Schwartz, followed by Chris Mertz.
Great. I don't have a lot to add. I will just echo what my fellow panelists have said, which is it's incredibly important that we're paying attention to the workforce needs and the training needs of our social workers. In addition to the investments that Ms. Sanderling highlighted, there was some additional money in the budget to increase the foster family agency rate so that we can also reduce social worker turnover within our foster family agencies. But need to continue to assess and implement ways to continue to support and strengthen our workforce. At
that point, I'd like to offer either to Chris Mertz or to the supervisors to comment on ways in which we can support our social workers who are on the front lines of this current situation.
I think I'll just make one very brief comment and make sure we give lots of time to the board members. The foster family agency rate was in fact increased, one portion of it to help us with our social workers, and we greatly appreciated that. The ongoing rate does not have a COLA. And so each year that means we need to come back and make requests. So it's one of the only child welfare rates that does not have a COLA. So having some stability over time would certainly continue to support that effort.
Thank you for that. Supervisors, would like to turn the floor over to you. I believe you're on mute, Supervisor.
Assemblyman, can you hear me? Thank you so much for your patience. I want you to know that we have been watching and listening intently since your opening remarks. We have been in the room. We were under a different profile. I'm Chairman Steve Brandow. You know that, Assemblyman. I wanted to introduce myself to the other panelists. And I'm joined today by Vice Chairman Brian Pacheco, one of the members of the Board of Supervisors. And we also have our incoming CAO, Paul Nerlin, with us today, as well as the Department of Social Services Director, Delfino Nera. And we've been listening intently. Assemblyman, I've taken my own notes, and I think Supervisor Pacheco has taken twice as many as I have. It's been a fascinating conversation so far. And in all reality, every comment that's been made has been valuable at some level, in my opinion. And I want to say that, this is just my own remarks. I think Fresno County is open to addressing this complex problem from many different angles, including the social worker angle, to bring more effective help to the kids. So we are listening, and I'll open it up to Supervisor Pacheco or any of our two other Fresno County folks here.
Well, I would just say, Dr. Arambula, again, I want to thank you for including us. Our whole board, if we were allowed, I believe would try and be here, but for the Brown Act, only 2 of us are allowed by our rules, so we are here. It's been very informative, and again, to hear from the experts throughout the state, and I appreciate hearing from our staff. The chairman has committed. We will address this from a broad range of issue, and I would completely agree that our caseload is too high, our turnover is too high, and we will address that. Our workers will be able to do a better job when we address those issues. It has been brought to the forefront, and we will address that. We do appreciate everything they have done and for bringing this to our attention as well.
Thank you, Supervisors. The next question we will have will go to both the state's Department of Social Services as well as the County Welfare Directors Association, as I'd like to see if we can identify some best practices that can serve as a program for many to model. Can you give us some examples that come from throughout California? And is there a common denominator as to what makes those programs effective? Either for Angie or Kathy.
Sorry, Dr. Arambula, my sound was breaking up a little bit, but you were asking about best practices and the common denominators for those programs. Is that correct? Sorry about that.
That is correct. And if
I
you
think
have
some of the best practices that, I think some of the best practices that we found to support youth with complex care needs are the work that's been done through our therapeutic foster care providers, the intensive services foster care model that we have, as well as the enhanced intensive services foster care think someone earlier was describing that we have these STRTPs of one, as we call them, or really kind of intensive but home-based support that we bring to, basically bring professionals into the home. And it's a one-on-one or two-on-one, even three-on-one staffing ratio to really support the young person in order to make sure that their individualized needs are being met. And I would say the common denominators that we have found that create success are first a system of care approach, making sure that we're working with all of our system partners. We've got the strike team that's available at the state that we bring in to support the interagency leadership teams within the county. That includes partners through our education partners, our partners with developmental services, our partners within our healthcare services, our behavioral healthcare partners, as well as, obviously the child welfare and our licensing partners as well. And I think it's really important to have that cross-system, cross-collaboration. We've been highlighting some of the dollars available through our own budget for the child welfare agencies and support social workers, but there are many more investments on the education side and the behavioral health side, and making sure that we're leveraging and really thinking through how to tie all of those together to serve our young people. I think it's also critically important that the programs be individualized. Again, there's no one-size-fits-all solution to these problems, and we've got the innovation and flexibility within our system to create individualized programs. And then finally, I think the key to the success is approaches that are trauma-informed. We need to make sure that all of our approaches are, trauma-informed, that we're not triggering our youth, which can create even more trauma and then lead to having to have, solve a bigger crisis. So those are, I think, key elements to our success.
Kathy?
I would say yes, and I have a few other thoughts that are very in the same line as Ms. Schwartz. I think where we've seen a strong partnership at the table to discuss, especially youth with the most complex or multi-system needs, we have seen success in finding placements and services for those youth. And I'm thinking about within AB 2083, the bill that I mentioned earlier, there is a requirement that local agencies, and that includes not just the county-based agencies such as our agency, probation, behavioral health, and the health department, but also the local regional center, the county office of education or other local education office, be together to talk about what is needed when youth have multiple needs, which is very common. I think there's a lot of sort of crossover across our the youth that we have identified as those having a higher level of need and those who have needs in multiple systems. It's not 100% crossover, but the Venn diagram has a lot of overlap. And so in counties where that has been put into place, they are, I think, more likely to show promise in being able to find a place that may be something where education is taking the lead, or the developmental disability agency, the regional center agency, is taking the lead, not always the child welfare or probation agency taking the lead. So that's one factor that I'd suggest. Additionally, one of the things that we've seen over time is a loss of transitional type housing for our older youth in care. And so in areas where they have been able to stand up or retain more of a transitional housing model for youth who are growing older in care, who may be in our extended foster care program, but are on the verge of kind of aging out of that program at age 21, or would like to leave foster care at age 18 and not participate initially in that extended foster care program, having some assistance so they do not become homeless and then, potentially on the streets or couch surfing, which is not a good situation and can lead to, again, some of the same kinds of issues that we've been discussing. And then I think just sort of continuing in those areas where they've continued to figure out a way to support their providers. There are some areas where, counties have realignment dollars and they may be able to develop some additional support for their providers, for their relative caregivers or their foster parents, to be able to take respite breaks, for example, which may enable them to preserve a placement rather than have that placement become disrupted and have to find a new place for the child. I think those are just a few examples, but I think you'll see a willingness to really partner and also kind of roll up your sleeves and dig in. And I think as Angie noted, it's often that individualized level of rolling up your sleeves. And it does take a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort. It's not always successful, so you got to try it again. I think just impressing upon everyone the sort of level of commitment, but also the level of staff work and staff time across these agencies is pretty critical to understand why there's that burnout, why it doesn't always work, and that it's hard to do for every single one of our youth who could benefit from it under the current structure.
Thank you for those examples of some of the best practices. And if I can stay with those same two panelists, I'd like to follow up, as we have referenced the legislature placing money in for high needs youth. I believe it was 50 million in this calendar year and 50 in the subsequent calendar year. And I'm hoping both from Kathy and Angie, we can hear about either expectations for how this money is to be spent or what our plans are for implementing this to help us to address those very individuals who have the highest needs.
Sure, happy to do that. The 50 million was there for this year and next for the emergency response workers, which is something that we were talking about when talking about how we can support the social workers. In addition to that, there was also over 139 million to support specifically the needs of youth with complex care. And that's really broken into 3 different buckets of funds. So there was a little over 18 million that's available on an ongoing basis in order to develop strategies that are very child specific. And that money is available now. The letter to the counties went out, as well as the fiscal letter, so that counties can start tapping into those dollars. And it's really about, if they've got one of these children who they've identified needs kind of a different outside the box model, they can apply to use those funds in order to support whatever that model is, whatever we need in order to address the needs of that individual child and sort of bring the resources and services to bear. And there's also an additional 42.3 million that is one-time dollars that will be used to address the gaps, the capacity within the counties. And so that'll be based on counties' sort of assessment of what does their continuum look like, and really where are the gaps within that continuum? Are they lacking some of these emergency homes that can just be there all the time so that we're not having kids in offices? We've got emergency homes that are identified, that are there. And anytime we've got a youth in crisis in the middle of the night, you've got some place that you're able to go. Or do you have gaps within sort of the STRTP continuum, which some of the panelists were talking about earlier? Like, where are those gaps and what do we need to do in order to address that capacity need within that particular county? And then this third bucket of money for the complex care funds is to enable some counties or providers to launch a pilot, the crisis continuum pilot. And there are real details in the statute in terms of what has to be included within the pilot, but it's essentially developing a single entity organizing a placement continuum that's everything from sort of the highest level of care all the way through the intensive supports and services necessary to transition that child into a home-based setting. And so there's also, I think, a little over 64 million in order to launch those pilots and really see if sort of that innovative approach of having sort of a single provider that's making sure that they have all of that within their continuum helps to address these needs. And the RFP for the pilot will be out in the next month or so. And I think we're very close on getting the funds to address the capacity needs within the counties out the door as well.
Thank you for that, Kath.
I mean, this is a little bit of a tricky one, I think, to answer. I mean, Ms. Schwartz gave kind of the technical details. I will attest to a level of frustration in the counties that we didn't receive the all-county letter on the $18 million until October 1st, and that we didn't receive the county fiscal letter, which would enable us to actually get the claiming instructions until October 29th, when the budget was signed in July. And we've all been talking about the urgency of this issue, especially as it relates to the return of the out-of-state children and youth that was started nearly a year ago. So it's taken a year or almost a year for the funding to be discussed, approved, and now made available to counties. And I know that it's hard, that the state has a lot to do. We do have a number of our youth that were very concerned about where they're placed. And I said that, in June and July as the issue was being discussed. We also now have a looming moratorium on the use of out-of-state placements. And essentially, that's kind of already in effect because they've all been decertified. It's maybe been a few counties that have been able to place children and youth out of state by using the process that was allowed. But in the absence of the funding actually being moved forward to counties, and without, there's some planning requirements where we're not concerned about needing to explain why we needed to use the money and for which youth, but I think we have not yet seen whether the requirements that are in the letter are so high that makes it difficult for counties to utilize the funds that we know are needed for counties. And we're looking forward to hopefully very soon seeing something on the 43 million. As Ms. Schwartz noted, that's not for the individual youth, it's a more of a systemic issue, but I believe it will have maybe similar planning requirements. So there will still be a couple of hoops to jump through when we do get the funding made available. I know that there's urgency on this. I know the state does feel the urgency. I will express from the directors a bit of frustration on how long it's taken. I don't think that's a surprise to the state. We consider them very strong partners. We try to work very well together. And in this case, it's just taken a while. And so we're optimistic, we're hopeful that now that the funding is available for the 18 million, that we can really get going and do that individualized sleeve rolling up that I've been talking about. But there's a lot to still do, I think, to be able to take that letter and turn it into a dollar and turn it into a service. And so we're going to try to support the counties, and I know the state will as well, to do that as quickly as possible.
I'd like to bring in Chris Donor Mertz to comment on this question as well.
Well, I wanted to make sure that folks were aware of, in addition to the funding that's being made available, we do have a demonstration project that a handful of counties, I think 6 or 7, and about 16 to 18 providers are involved in just what these individualized programs should look like. We're developing a playbook so that across the state, counties and providers might stand these up, but I would certainly agree with comments that Ms. Schwartz and Ms. Sanderling Mcdonald made that, it's going to take time, and we're not talking about a lot of youth. Frankly, we're talking about small numbers of youth, very intensive individualized programming. So I want to underscore that for those FTRTPs that are currently available, for those intensive services foster care programs that are currently available, we need to make sure they have the funding to remain stable, and so that the full continuum is stable. We can't just be attending to one particular component of the continuum. It really does have to be all of it.
Thank you for that. And we'll just say we're going to ask one final question. And while I acknowledge the need for us to evaluate the entire continuum, I would like to see if you can try and summarize what is the number one thing that you think we need to be working on to ensure that what occurred here in Fresno County doesn't occur anywhere else here in the state, while acknowledging that many of the other counties are experiencing and going through the same struggles. I'm hoping you can come out with one recommendation that we can have going forward.
Were you directing that to any particular person?
This is actually for all of the panelists, if they are willing to give their succinct answer.
Well, I think I would say we really do need a statewide approach. When I think about, a child and family team struggling with how to find the most appropriate placement for a young person, that can't always be done locally. And while we have a process that creates technical assistance to counties, I think that it needs to be much more robust. It needs to include parents or resource families as part of that, as well as youth, so that we really are all working together when a child is in need. And I'm not talking about all the children in foster care. I'm talking about that small number of youth who just seem to struggle to maintain stability.
If I might build on that, this is Kathy. what Chris said. Yes, and I think one of the things to remember is that as we've lost these placements and services as options for counties to use, we've had more and more competition for the same placement slot and the same service. As we, brought back in 130 youth, we bombarded Chris's members with requests, and they probably got 10 requests for every bed that was open. And so having assistance from the state to both navigate that, so we're not just duking it out one-on-one, county by county, youth by youth, but also to develop additional placement options, like I mentioned, the PRTFs, AB 226, which Chris's organization, the Alliance, sponsored, would have, they're not going to start tomorrow, but at least it would have created this sort of new placement option, and that was vetoed. Now, I'm hopeful because the governor's veto message didn't say, I never will entertain it. It said there were some issues that we need to work through, and I think we're just on the verge of starting conversations to have, what are those issues and work it through, and I appreciate the state and Health and Human Services Agency both reaching out to get those conversations underway. But I think it really speaks to the need for that leadership that enables us throughout the state, both Chris's members, workers, probation, and my child welfare agencies, to work together to address the issue. So it's not just one here and one there. I think a true best practice is that we work on it together and we figure out a plan, and then we're moving forward on that plan together.
Supervisor Brando, Chairman, I think you had your hand up. Would like to make sure you have an opportunity. You're on mute, Supervisor.
All right, can you hear me now? Perfect. Our Department Director, Delfino Nira, has a comment based on the conversation.
So, Assemblymember, just 2 points to kind of bring it back to what Lorraine and Hector were talking about. There's two things, specific things I think that we, as the counties in the state, need to address, the legislature, is to revisit the study that was done in the SB 2030 about the caseload standards and recommendations that the legislature has never fully implemented or funded to that. And we need to address that so that we can provide sort of equity of workload for our staff. And then in addition, throughout all of our programs that we administer for the state, the counties, especially the Central Valley counties, have not had sort of a cost of living adjustment for the expenses for those workers. So basically, we're cannibalizing other funds to pay for those workers. So I think that we need to review that so that the counties can make fiscally sound decisions to have the right amount of staff and to give them the appropriate compensation. I believe, and for Fresno, it's been since 2001 since the rate of reimbursement for individual worker has been adjusted. So that's a significant amount of time that we need to look at to address.
Deputy Director Schwartz, followed by Hector Serta and Lorraine Ramirez.
Well, this may be considered ducking a little, but I think what this conversation has really shown is that we need a multi-pronged and cross-system approach to addressing these issues. And, I think we're working across all of those different sectors. And I think that that's the key, is to make sure that we're sort of not siloed and that we're really thinking about this as a cross-system strategy.
Hector and Lorraine.
This is Hector. I'll go. So to address the question, this last comment or last statement, I really believe what we do to prevent something like this is, I can only speak for our county because that's where I live and work, but I do appreciate everybody's comments, and they're very valuable. But there was a comment earlier about, is it normal for Fresno County to have 107% staff turnover rate? And my closing remarks would be, that's not normal and it's not okay. And there has been extensive research done in this state that's compared counties within the state of California that showed specifically that those counties with lower rates of child abuse had the best paid staff. They had lowest rate of staff turnover and compliance with recognized practice standards. So for Fresno County, it's not normal and it's attainable. We can have a better Fresno. A worker such as myself, we can go somewhere nearby to a local county and get paid better and be treated better. I mentioned that I've heard FFAs be mentioned. That's still different. Social workers who work for FFAs, they get a lot of good incentives. They get different things than we do, and we don't get anything. So I think my closing remark was, it's time for Fresno County to really be looked into about how we're compensated, how we're treated, and how we're supervised and managed, because it's been very oppressive. And a lot of workers are leaving, and we shouldn't have to leave. We should be proud and we should want to work for the county. And that starts with our leadership. I'm very inspired that our board, members of our board are here, but it's going to take all of you to really look into the research and dig in and hear us, hear what we've been saying for years. A lot of my colleagues who have been here before me, that we need to be heard, and we have the capacity and the tools to feel heard and function better, and we need you to support us. So that would be my closing statement is, it's not normal, and we can reach that place where it's normal and everybody can and will be effective. Thank you.
Lorraine? Lorraine, I just want to give you an opportunity to comment if you would like.
I think that is right on. We brought these concerns many times to our members. I sat in Lorraine,
we're having a hard time hearing you. Is there a better connection? I am happy to make sure that your voice is heard here, though. So if you would like to mute and try again, want to make sure you're given the space. While she's waiting, I may give.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead and try, Lorraine.
Okay, sorry, I'm in the county building, so the reception's not great. But like I was saying, we've met with Delfino for years, brought up these concerns. These concerns are not new. We've brought up caseloads. We've brought up how we need a training unit. If our voices aren't heard for the people that are doing the job every day, then that's why we ended up where we ended up, with the children were being even more neglected than they were when we first brought it up. The voices of the workers that are doing the job need to be heard. And if they are not heard and they are not respected, then this is going to continue to happen again and again. And that's where it needs to start. And we need to make sure that if we do work groups or whatever we're doing to ensure that this never happens again, that's great. But there needs to be a worker in those work groups. There needs to be a foster parent in those work groups. There needs to be people that are doing the work and are making sure these services are.
Seems that Lorraine is frozen up. Jeffrey, I'm going to give you a chance. Finish up.
So like I said, can you hear me? So like I've said, in order for this never to happen again to our kids, any of our Fresno County kids, we need to have everyone in some type of work group or in some type of meeting so that this gets addressed right, so that we never have to have these children sleeping on a floor again, or sleeping on a table, conference table, because it's more comfortable than sleeping on a yoga mat on the floor.
Thank you, Lorraine. We will go to closing comments from Senator Caballero's office.
Thank you, Dr. Arambula, and thank you to everybody that participated in this panel. It was incredibly informative, and I think conversations like these, it sounds like there have been many, definitely not enough, and they need to continue. But as Kathy mentioned earlier, we've got some real work to do, and it's time to roll these sleeves up. And again, as I mentioned at the start of this conversation, our office is a willing and open partner to see this work get done. So thank you again, Dr. Arambula, for having us today.
Thank you to Senator Caballero for co-hosting this with us today, as well as to all of our panelists from the County Board of Supervisors to the County Welfare Directors Association to the California Alliance for Children and Family Services to California Department of Social Services and those who are on the front lines with our social workers. I am grateful, as I mentioned at the start, for their ability to speak their truth and to stand up for children. I think it's important for us to all be willing to roll up our sleeves and figure out what those best practices are so that we can meet the needs of California kids. I look forward to that work and am encouraged by the conversation today and our ability to help to break down silos and have these productive conversations. I thank you all for joining us today on this town hall